We are going to be building an HTML form in this video, and I'm trying to teach you how to do this because it's really crucial. If you want to begin to build something really dynamic, you want to be able to gather dynamic information or data from people, maybe their first name, their last name, email, phone number, and you want to maybe seed that or save that into a database. You start that with something like an HTML form. All right, so we're going to take a look at some attributes that is even associated with that of the HTML form in this video, something like the method. We're going to take a look at also something like action, and we're going to move on to maybe taking a look at the input elements like maybe the text, email, phone number field, and even the submit button. All right, so we're going to build that in this video. So let's get right in and then see how we can actually generate such an input field or such a form in HTML right now without wasting more time.
So with HTML forms, you can actually gather form inputs. You can gather information from a user. Maybe you want their first name, their last name, or even their email. You can actually do that using something like form in HTML, and this is really very crucial, just like I said before. So what I want to do right here, I do have a folder that I just basically call the HTML forms, and it's completely empty right here. As you can see, if I get that opened up, but what I want to do first of all is to open that up with my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go ahead and write some code inside of that, right? So I do have that open right here. We need an index, so let's create an index inside of that, and from there we can find out how we should be able to create a form. Right, so we do have an index in here, and what I want to do is to throw in my HTML boilerplate. So with element, if I do exclamation and then hit tab, it's going to generate this for me. So if you're still using something like a Notepad++, you should just pause the video and then type this out. Of course, this is not really too much, so I'm going to just do form. I'm going to just basically call that HTML forms. All right, and then within the body right here, if you want to create a form in HTML, we normally start that with something that is actually called a form tags. So to create a form in HTML, we do form, and we can close this, and then the closing tag is actually form this way, except that we don't have a / in here. So this is just basically how to create the form tags in HTML. All right, and of course, if you save the changes in here, and maybe you want to just basically save this in your browser, I don't think you are going to actually see anything yet. So if you open this up right here, see that we do have completely empty space within this particular place. All right, empty screen in there. So what you want to do, first of all, if you want to see something within your browser, for instance, if you want to add some stuff that you are basically going to see, maybe something like a field where you should ask people to type their first name or their last name or something of that nature. So if you want to create fields like maybe a field where you are actually going to be asking people to put their first name, their last name, and then maybe their email, you can actually do that by maybe creating an element that is actually called an input. So if I do input in here, and I'm going to just do, I will just put a type in here, and we're going to talk about the type as we move along, guys. So I'm going to do text in here, and I'm going to do a name, and then go ahead and set that to, maybe this is going to be first name, meaning that we're just basically going to collect the person's first name in here. All right, so we can actually even stop right here. For instance, if we save the changes right here, we should be able to see this field come up within our browser. And if we go back if we go to our browser right here, and I will refresh this, you're going to see that we do have a field where someone can actually type. So if I want to enter my name in there, you see that I can actually type and put my name in there. All right, so however, there are quite a couple of things that we need to do in here. First of all, let me explain this line a little bit more. So we have an element called the input element right here. That is just that whole line. And then we'll have a type right here that we set to something like text in here. And what this means is that we want to be able to create a field that should allow us to type text inside of it, and then you should be able to accept text. So if we change this thing to something like number right here, just watch what is going to happen. If I save the changes and then we go back to our browser and we refresh, you see that this particular field is actually going to be accepting numbers right here. So if I type letters, it will not accept it, but if I type 1, 2, 3, whatever numbers that I type, it's just basically going to go ahead and then accept them. All right, so that's just the power of the input fields that we have just created right here. So I'm going to return this one to text because we just want to use that as a field that we're basically going to use to type letters. Now I want to use this opportunity to create other fields in here. All right, remember that this field that I just showed you right here, whatever that you actually type in here, let me refresh this to take away the number. I think we changed that to a number. Okay, we haven't actually saved the changes. If we save the changes and go back in here, refresh, so it can now accept the letters. So this is going to be Benkino. So this Benkino that I typed in here is actually called a value. All right, so that's just basically what is coming from the user right here. If you want to set a default value, into this particular place, you can also do that, because if you go back in here right here and you just do value and then set that to be equal to, and maybe we are going to just set that to CJ right there. If you save the changes right here, then go back to your browser and now refresh, you're going to see that automatically this is going to come with CJ as a default value right here. All right, of course you can delete it and then type another thing. Okay, so but what I know is that people mostly do not actually include any values in the value attribute in here. All right, so they normally leave this to be empty so that they can just dynamically collect whatever the users just basically want to set as their first name or their last name in here. So that's just what that is. The next thing I want to do is, if I copy this right here, I want to duplicate this for the what is it called, I'm going to just do, I'm going to break the line in here, and what I want to do is to change this one from what it is right now to, this is going to be last name. And that reminds me, guys, so I didn't actually kind of explain this name attribute right here. So the name attribute right here, what it's just basically doing is to provide a way of we being able to at a later time connect to our backend language. All right, so what this is just basically going to do is, by the time you're going to be writing the scripting part of this particular form that you have right here, let's say you want to submit this form, if people type their first name and then type their last name and you want to save it into a database, you want to be able to like grab whatever that is being typed in this particular field using this particular name attribute right here. All right, so you see that the one down here called the last name is also different from the one up here. So if you want to also create something like maybe the email field, you can also do that. So if I do BR in here and I'm going to just copy this, I think I even already got out on my clipboard, and then paste it down here. So what I want to do with this one is, maybe let's say I want to like grab onto the email of the person. So if I want to grab onto that, the first thing I need to change is to change this to an email, and I want to change this to maybe let's call that your email, and let's call email just like that, and the value can still just be empty right there. So that's just basically what that is. So if we go back to our browser or refreshing here, you see that we do have like 3 fields, which the first one is actually for the name, and I mean the first name, last name, and then the email field in here. All right, so that's just what that is. So the next thing I want to do right here, because if you take a look at the fields that we have in here, if people visit this website and then find these boxes within the website, they don't even actually understand what the hell you're actually trying to let them do within your website. All right, so we want to find a way to be sure that we kind of let them know what they need to type into each of these particular fields that we have in here. And to do that is really very simple. We're going to use something like a label to do that right now, and I'm going to just do label tags in here. So I'm going to just do, so if I do this right here, within this particular place, we can go ahead and just say first name, and with that it shows a kind of be able to let people know what they want to type into that particular field that is below it. So down here I'm going to just do last name, and the last one in here is just basically going to be the email field. All right, so we should just change this to email, and that should just be that, right? So if we save the changes and then we'll take a look at that from our browser, you see that it kind of looks a lot more beautiful than it used to be, right? So if you want to create more spaces, you can actually just copy and then duplicate this a few times just like that, and maybe also right here, and just to create a space around that particular place. All right, so this is just it. So if someone comes into this particular website and just see first name, he can go ahead and enter his first name right here, last name right here, and then go ahead and enter an email right here. All right, so that is just basically how to do that. The next thing I want us to like take a look at right here is actually going to be something like a submit button. So to do that, if you want to create a submit element in here, you can just use input and then set the type, and we're going to just set this type to something like called that is actually called a submit. So have that in there. Of course, it's also going to have a name, and we could just maybe call this something like send, or it could also be called as something like submit. All right, so we can have a value that's just basically the text that people will basically see, and this is typically called as something like submit or send. All right, so whatever you want to call that, or register, whatever you want to call that, you can actually put that value right here. So if you save the changes and then take a look at that, what we are basically going to see is just this submit that we do have right here. So if we go back to our browser and then we refresh, you see that we do have a submit button right here, and if we hit on it, it attempts to submit the, so that's just basically what that is. So I want to like take this a little bit further by adding some more attribute to the form, the opening tag right here. So the way that it is right here, by default, a form has what is actually called a get request, and I want to I want to open this in another tab, double click on this, it opens. So if you take a look at the URL right here, you see that there's nothing actually in this particular URL except just the name, the path of where this particular form is actually found. If you fill this form, let's say I fill this form with this following information, David, and then I kind of add an email right here. So this is going to be just called test@test.com. Like that. If I hit on the submit button right here, you're going to see by default the form is going to try to like submit to this particular page. That's number one, and with that it's actually found in what is actually called a action right here. All right, so with action we can designate where you want the form to be processed, and this is typically where the scripting is actually located. And at a later time we're going to take a look at what I'm just talking about in details. All right, but for now, if you do not even set an action, the form is actually going to assume that the form actually has a default action, meaning that it's going to use the same page to process itself. All right, so the way that it is right here, if I try to hit on submit, it's going to try to process the form within this particular page. And then another thing that we also need to talk about is actually called a method right here. Of course, we're going to take a look at some of these things at a later time. And with method, we do have what is actually called a get, and we also have what is also called a post. All right, so once we talk about post, it means that once you submit a form, you wouldn't actually see the information that was typed into this particular form passed onto the URL right here. But with get, if I take this back to get, you're going to notice that, let's take this back, this is going to be method, and set that back to something like a get right here. So if I set this to something like get and then try to submit the form, you're going to notice that once I submit the form, most of the things that I typed into the form, like the first name, last name, is actually going to be passed onto the URL right here. And that's just basically the default. So if I take this back to just the way that it is right here, if I save the changes and then fill that form out, so if I hit on submit, you're going to notice that some extra characters are going to be passed onto the URL right here. So let's hit on submit. You notice that we do have extra characters passed on the URL. Look at first name, and this is the name that I typed, which is Chito right there. And then the last name is also passed onto the URL. Then your email is also passed onto the URL. So that's just what I mean by get and then post a method. All right, so if I every time let's say for instance I want to set the method to something like post, so if I do post right here and then I fill the form out, if I go back in here and I refresh this page, the information is gone. I'm going to just do Benkino right here, and maybe the last name is actually going to be David, and then we can do maybe this is going to be code@code.com. If we hit on submit right here, the form is going to try to submit to the same page, but it wouldn't actually pass some of those information on the URL. So let's check. If I hit in here, you see that the form tries to submit, but then there was actually nothing on the URL. And if you are curious about the difference between these two, the difference is just very clear. The get is actually going to pass some information through the URL, and that of the post method is actually not going to pass anything through the URL. And which one is actually more secure? The one that is really more secure is this post method right here. So if you have some data that you don't want people to like get a clue of what they are, especially the hackers, all right, you want to make sure that you use something like post. Okay, so if you are going through something like registration system or login system, you want to make use of post method. All right, and maybe if you have used something like a search engine, so if you check something like google.com right here, if I open a new tab and just do I'm going to just do google.com and I open that up, you're going to see that if I say something like what is HTML and try to press enter, see that Google kind of passes such information through the URL. All right, this is the reason for this is because your search, this type of search is actually not sensitive. All right, so that's why they can actually pass that through the URL. If you're building something like a search box within your website, you can use Gate. But if you're building something like maybe a registration system, so I recommend you should use something like Post, right? So that is it. All right, and so let's add the action right here, and I said that to maybe we're gonna, if we want to use the same page, we leave it the way that it is. So if we do something like say processing, maybe .php, depending on the language you want to use, maybe I'm going to just use something like PHP at a later time. Let's make sure I type this correctly. So that's why I'm just using .php right here. So it could just still be .html or whatever you want to just basically call it. In fact, I'm going to change that to HTML since we are just strictly working on HTML at this time. All right, but what this is just basically going to do is that once you click on the submit button in our browser, it's going to take this information right here and then pass it onto this particular page for processing. All right, so if you do have script in there that is just basically going to pick all this information up and then process them, it's going to just go ahead and then do the processing in there. All right, so let's just test to see how that is just basically working. So so right here, if you fill the form, you're going to notice that it's going to try to like take us to a different page right here. All right, so if we hit on submit and you see that it takes us to a different page. Look at the page that's just taking us to processing.html. And if you do have the scripting here, it's going to just go ahead and process that. So that is just that. So we're not going to do the processing just yet, because we haven't actually done our backend yet, so we couldn't actually go on with doing that. But this is just what it is on how to just start creating your HTML form. So we've been able to create the text fields right here and even the email field. So with whatever reason, if you maybe type something that is not an email in here, it's just like basically a kind of a complaint if you try to maybe submit that. All right, so what I typed in here is not an email, so if I hit on submit, it's going to tell you that please add an ad and the email address. All right, so that just basically that is as a bit of a check to the field in there. And I'm going to just basically stop right here. We're going to take this form further. Form is really very crucial. We're going to do a lot at a later time, but for now I'm going to just stop right here. So if you like the video, just feel free to give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye for now.